You've heard a lot of crazy stories about World War II, but few come close to what happened on that frozen patch of land where an entire platoon was minutes away from being wiped from history. The men were surrounded, their ammunition was running out, no reinforcements were arriving, and the enemy moved like a ghost through the snow. It was the kind of situation where anyone would accept the worst. But what no one expected was that the only chance of survival would come from someone who didn't speak, didn't shoot, and didn't even understand the map of the region. It came from a dog, a military German shepherd that, until that moment, had only shown obedience and keen sense of smell. Nothing more than that. Until, on that day, something inside him triggered. The entire platoon saw when the dog froze, sniffed the wind, and ran as if he'd seen the devil cross the trenches. He didn't dodge the explosion, didn't look back, didn't wait for a command. He simply went. And that's precisely what shocked the soldiers. Because behind those enemy lines there was nothing but guaranteed death. Even so, the dog disappeared in the smoke. No human there would do that. No one would risk it like that. And that's why, when he vanished, the commander's only reaction was to lower his head and accept that he had just lost the best member of the unit. But then came the part that no one, absolutely no one, could have imagined. Hours later, when the cold was biting to the bone, when the soldiers were preparing for a surprise attack that would destroy them, the dog returned, walking crookedly, bleeding, tired, almost collapsing. But it returned, and what it carried attached to its vest not only shocked everyone, but changed the course of the entire battle. An object that no soldier could get their hands on, an item that, if in the wrong place, would kill hundreds. But there, at that moment, it became the most powerful weapon in the platoon, and it is precisely now that you need to pay attention. Because what this dog brought was not just a detail of war. It wasn't just a curious thing that happened on the front. It was the kind of event that makes a commander turn pale, makes a soldier forget the pain, and makes everyone rethink what really decides the fate of a battle. And if you think you already understand what happened, rest assured, you haven't understood even half of it. There's a major twist coming. There are details that seem unbelievable but were documented. There are decisions that changed lives. And there's an explanation for this dog's behavior that no human could have predicted. So let's continue. I'll just warn you about one thing. This isn't a cute story about a heroic dog. It's a war story. Dirty, cold, improbable, and full of consequences. Are you ready to find out what really happened when the dog ran behind enemy lines and returned with something that turned the tide of the war? Because after that, you'll never look at a military dog the same way again. Tell me something. What do you think this dog actually found behind enemy lines? Before continuing the story, leave your like because it really helps the channel, and if you're not already subscribed, sign up now so you don't miss any of the upcoming stories, and feel free to comment below. What city are you watching from? I really want to know how far this story is going. The truth is that nothing that morning indicated that anyone there had a chance of returning home. The platoon was stuck in a forgotten part of the front, surrounded by smoke, trampled snow, broken embankments, and a heavy silence that was only broken by the occasional stray shot. It was the kind of silence a soldier recognizes, the silence that warns the enemy is moving, preparing something, and when that kind of feeling arises, no one breathes easy. Commander Fraser, a war-weary man, already had a different look in his eyes. He didn't speak, but everyone knew he had lost hope. As hard as it was, he understood the cruel mathematics. Little ammunition, communication cut off, wounded men, no reinforcements on the way. It was only a matter of time before the Germans closed in and wiped everyone out, and that time, in the minds of those living through it, seemed shorter and shorter. The snow was thick, covering helmets, rifles, supply boxes, and even the platoon dog, Bruce, a German shepherd trained to sniff out mines, find the wounded, and warn of enemy advances. He was usually calm, alert, obedient, the kind of dog that never does anything without a command. But that day there was something strange about him. Bruce paced restlessly back and forth, sniffing the air, growling softly, as if he were sensing something the soldiers couldn't perceive. One of the soldiers, Lewis, tried to joke around to break the tension, but the joke died in his throat when the dog suddenly stopped, frozen, staring at the bushes that lay in the direction of enemy territory. Its tail stiffened, its ears perked up, and the fur on its back stood on end. Anyone who knows dogs knows that wasn't fear, it was high alert. And when a military dog gives that kind of signal, nobody ignores it. The commander observed this change carefully. He had known Bruce since basic training. He knew that behavior only appeared when something big was approaching. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't an animal in the woods. It wasn't a shadow. It was something out of war. It was human movement. It was real danger. Tension rose quickly. Some soldiers instinctively ducked. Others positioned themselves behind the remains of a destroyed wall. Their hands trembled slightly, but their aim was steady. But no one knew where to point. It was like expecting an attack out of nowhere. An attack you know is going to happen, but you have no idea when. With each passing minute, the air seemed heavier. The wind carried a strange smell, like gunpowder mixed with churned-up earth. And each crack of a tree sounded like the footsteps of an enemy. Amidst all this, the platoon's radio remained dead, only emitting static. They were completely isolated. That's when the first thing that truly frightened the soldiers happened. Bruce let out a single bark, short and dry, and then took a few steps forward, but this time without looking back. It was as if he had received an invisible call, something pulling him, something only he could perceive. Lewis tried to grab the dog by the vest, but Bruce escaped in a quick movement. The commander shouted, "Bruce, stop!" But it was no use, the dog took off, and no one there could react in time. It crossed Allied territory, plunged into the soft snow, climbed over craters, naturally avoided a patch of ground that probably hid a mine, and ran straight to where no sane human would go, towards enemy lines. The scene unfolded so quickly that some soldiers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others were paralyzed, unsure whether to run after them, shout, shoot to warn the enemy, or simply hope that this wasn't the end of the dog. In the commander's mind, only one phrase kept repeating incessantly. He would never do that without a reason. But what was the reason? To kill oneself? To warn the enemy? To flee the war? Nothing made sense. The truth is, at that moment, the lack of meaning was what was most frightening. Because when even the dog, the most disciplined being in the unit, started acting that way, it was because something much bigger was happening. Something that none of the soldiers there could see. Some tried to run after him, but the commander ordered them to turn back. It was suicide. Anyone who crossed that open strip of snow was dead. The Germans knew that region well and had hidden positions everywhere. And so, with a heavy silence cutting through the air, the soldiers watched the dog disappear among burnt trees, thin smoke and frozen debris. He simply vanished. And the worst part is that everyone knew. No creature, human or animal, ever returned alive from that side. But even so, Bruce went, no control, without hesitation, as if he already knew what he had to do. And there, at that exact moment, without anyone noticing, the fate of that operation began to change. When Bruce disappeared into the snow, the entire platoon froze, as if someone had pressed an invisible button that froze everyone in place. It wasn't just shock, it was disbelief, because no soldier there had ever seen that dog act on impulse. Never. He only moved on. Command only advanced when it was time, only barked when there was real danger. So if he ran like that, it was because something serious was happening, something that no human there noticed in time. Commander Fraser stared at the dog's trail as one watches a friend going to his death. It wasn't drama, it was fact. Those enemy lines weren't just territory on the other side. They were a labyrinth of camouflaged trenches, high positions with a complete view of the area, mines hidden in the frozen ground, and snipers who didn't hesitate for a second. Even a bird flying too low there was at risk. And Bruce had run, without considering anything. The cold began to bite harder, but it wasn't the wind. It was the anxiety. That anxiety you feel when you know something is going to happen, but you don't know what. Each soldier reacted in a different way. One gripped his rifle tightly, another knelt silently, another cursed softly. But no one dared move a muscle to go after Bruce. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. Private Lewis was the most shaken. He was the closest to Bruce, always secretly feeding him, always playing with him before patrols. When he saw the dog disappear into the snow, he murmured, "He's not coming back." But the phrase came out as a sentence, not as a venting of frustration. The minutes began to drag on. First 5, then 10, then 20. And the more time passed, the greater the sense of danger became. It wasn't just the fact that the enemy was near. It was the kind of silence that betrayed movement. It seemed as if the wind carried footsteps, whispers, the sound of metal being dragged. It seemed as if every tree hid a pair of eyes. War creates these illusions and these certainties. The commander knew he needed to make a decision. He couldn't waste time waiting for a dog, but he also knew that ignoring that behavior could put everyone at risk. Bruce was never wrong. If he ran, it was because something was about to explode, literally or not. Fraser turned to his unit and began to reorganize the men into defensive positions. Everyone pay attention. Something is about to happen. But nobody asked what. Nobody. Everyone felt the same tightness in their stomach. And then, finally, came the first sign that Bruce's premonition was correct. 3 shots fired from a distance, coming from the direction he had run. Dry, rapid shots from a handgun. It wasn't open combat. It was hand-to-hand combat. It was an ambush, or interference, or someone trying to silence someone. Lewis's eyes widened. It's Bruce. But no one answered. Soon after, the sound died again, leaving the field with that deathly silence that makes even the air feel heavier. It was the kind of silence that makes a soldier feel his own breath turning to noise. More time passed. The day began to darken. The snow, once fine, now fell heavily, hindering visibility. The smoke from the early morning's impact still lingered, as if it had never dissipated. The entire platoon sensed that the enemy was slowly approaching, like someone setting a trap. They just didn't know when the trap would close. The commander did a quick calculation in his head. If Bruce had been captured, he would already be dead. That was the truth. The Germans didn't hesitate when it came to military dogs. So if there was no sign of the body, maybe he was alive. Or perhaps he was hiding, trying to get back. Or perhaps he was unwittingly bringing the enemy along with him. Uncertainty was what killed the most people. 30 minutes passed, then 40. The tension turned into almost physical pain. The cold seeped into his clothes, seeped into his boots, burned his skin. His breath became thick vapor. The fear, in turn, turned into absolute silence. And it was in this silence that the strangest thing happened. One of the soldiers, Martinez, put his hand on the ground to pick up his helmet and felt a slight vibration, as if the ground were trembling. "Commander, there's something here." When everyone stopped to feel it, the vibration disappeared. But it had been there. Was he an enemy? Was it artillery? Or was it something else? The atmosphere became so tense, it felt as if the air itself was on high alert. Some soldiers still swear to this day that they could smell a different odor coming from the wind, the smell of burnt metal, as if something had exploded far away. And that's when the worst part of the wait happens, when the brain starts to construct the worst possible scenario without needing any proof. And of course there was the fear of Bruce. Every second he took to appear was like a nail hammered into the coffin of hope. Until, minutes before it got completely dark, Lewis heard something. "Guys, did you hear that?" Everyone fell silent. A low, dragging sound, mixed with the sound of snow being pushed along. Steps? Clue? A moan? Or collective imagination? The commander raised his arm, demanding complete silence. And then the sound became clearer. It was an animal. It was heavy. It was irregular. He was well known. Private Lewis released the breath he seemed to have held for hours. "It's him." But the tone was not one of relief. It was out of fear, because judging by the noise, clearly Bruce, I wasn't feeling well. But at that moment, nobody had any idea what he was carrying attached to his vest, and nobody imagined that that thing carried in the snow, would be exactly what would turn the entire war upside down. The first thing the soldiers saw wasn't the dog. It was the trail. A crooked, irregular trail marked with blood and dragging in the snow. It was clear that it had come from far away, and that it had been suffering. But the strangest thing wasn't the trail itself. It was the direction. It wasn't coming from the closest route between the two territories. It wasn't coming from the side. It wasn't coming from behind. It was coming exactly from the center of enemy territory, the worst possible path, the one that no soldier, however experienced, would choose, and that detail alone was enough to make everyone's stomach churn. Private Lewis was the first to run a few steps to get a better look, but the commander grabbed him by his vest. "Don't move forward. He might be being followed." And that was the greatest fear at that moment. Because war has dirty tricks, letting an animal return to attract enemy fire, using the dog as bait, even tying explosives to it without them noticing. The entire platoon was ready to react if any suspicious movement appeared behind him. But seconds later came confirmation that there were no German troops nearby. The sound everyone heard was a groan so faint it seemed to be lost in the wind. "It's him," Lewis murmured, his voice completely broken this time. And then Bruce appeared, not walking, not trotting, not running. He appeared staggering. It was as if each step was a struggle, his left front paw faltering from time to time. His fur was covered in soot, with dark bloodstains trapped in the snow, and his snout dripped as he breathed heavily. But what was most striking wasn't the blood, nor the exhaustion, nor the injuries. It was the object stuck in the vest. It didn't seem to make sense. It was too big for him to carry like that, too heavy, and judging by the silhouette, it definitely didn't belong to the American army. "What the hell is that?" one of the soldiers muttered. The commander didn't answer. He just watched, trying to understand how a wounded dog managed to carry something so bulky for so long through enemy territory. When Bruce finally got close enough, it became clear what the object was. A radio. Not just any radio. It was a German portable radio, the kind used for direct communication between operational units. Rare, expensive, and most importantly, heavily protected equipment. No enemy soldier would leave that lying around anywhere. If Bruce was carrying a radio like that, then something very serious must have happened on the other side. That's not possible," said Martinez, his eyes widening. Bruce stopped right in the center of the group, as if he knew that this was the only moment he could rest. And as soon as he stopped, his hind legs gave way. He collapsed to the side, panting, his whole body trembling. Lewis immediately knelt beside him, but the commander remained cautious. "Check if there are any explosives attached." It was a necessary precaution. The enemy was an expert at setting traps. 2. Soldiers examined the vest carefully, their hands cold and trembling, but found nothing. The radio was tied on only with makeshift straps, as if it had been hastily put on. There were deep scratch marks around it, as if Bruce himself had tried to pull or drag it. He got that all by himself?" Lewis asked, incredulous. No one answered, because the truth was too strange to say for sure. But one thing was clear. Bruce had brought that equipment of his own accord. While half the soldiers watched, the radio, the other half, stared at the dog, trying to understand how it was alive. There were cuts on its snout, a nasty wound on its side, and burn marks on its fur, as if it had been near an explosion. None of that seemed possible for an animal that had run alone into enemy territory. Commander Fraser picked up the radio. It was heavy, cold, with a few loose wires, but functional, very functional. He knew its value. He knew that in the right hands, it could mean life or death. "This here," he whispered, "is big." The soldiers moved closer, forming a tight circle. Martinez swallowed hard. "Commander, if that radio was on the other side, they must already know that we lost communication." Fraser nodded. "And that's exactly why we need to find out what they're saying now." Lewis, still beside Bruce, tried to stop the bleeding with an old cloth. The dog was breathing rapidly, as if trying to hold on to the little energy he had left. Even so, when he heard the commander's voice raise the radio, Bruce opened one eye, just one. But it was enough to show that he understood he had done his part. He had fulfilled his mission, and now the rest was up to them. The commander took the radio to a snow-covered rock, positioned the antenna, adjusted the dial, and tried to listen for something. First only static came through, then a louder hiss, and then voices. Voices in German, nervous voices, voices speaking too fast. The soldiers exchanged panicked glances. "Put that thing in a translator," one of them shouted. But there was no translator. The only one with basic German was Private Henry, who came running up. He put the makeshift earphone to his ear. His expression changed instantly. Their eyes squinted. My breath caught in my throat. His face turned white. "Commander, what is it, Henry?" They're planning to attack here, now, the whole battalion. They're saying our men are weakened. They're saying we're going down in less than 20 minutes. The silence that followed was deadly. Bruce, still lying in the snow, raised his head for a second as if to confirm it all. The commander raised his hand and spoke firmly, without hesitation. "Everyone to your positions. What that dog brought wasn't just a radio, it was a warning. No soldier disagreed. The weather changed instantly. It was the first time all morning that they had a real advantage, a chance to survive, and all because a dog alone faced the impossible to bring back the only information that could save the platoon. But what they didn't know was that this radio wasn't the only secret Bruce had brought back. When Henry finished translating that first part of the transmission, the entire platoon felt the impact, as if they had been punched in the stomach. Knowing that the enemy was about to attack was bad enough, but knowing that they were organized, confident, and counting on American vulnerability, that was even worse. It shattered any illusion of time. They didn't have half an hour. They had minutes, maybe less. Commander Fraser held the radio in his hands, but something seemed off. He couldn't take his eyes off a specific detail on the metal frame. A deep scratch on the side. It didn't look like fall damage. It looked like a scratch. "That was Bruce," said Lewis, still kneeling beside the dog. "He tried to drag it," the commander nodded. "Not just dragging. He opened something." That phrase put everyone on alert. Martinez approached and turned the radio on its side, wiping the surface with his glove. And that's when they saw it. The back cover was loose, not completely open, but displaced, as if someone had stuck their fingernails in there to pull something out. The marks were clear, deep, small, and repetitive scratches. From a dog. There was no doubt about it. "He tried to open it," Henry said. "No," the commander corrected quietly. "He tried to take something out of here." That left everyone silent. If Bruce had the radio strapped to his vest, why would he have tried to open it? What was he trying to reach? That's when the commander decided to open the lid completely. The metal made a loud creaking sound. When the lid fell, a small envelope, folded several times, slipped out. A brown envelope, dirty, stained with soot, but intact enough to reveal an official German stamp. Lewis's eyes widened. "What is that?" The commander didn't answer. He opened the envelope slowly, but inside he already knew. This wasn't ordinary. It wasn't just any note. It was information, protected information. The paper inside was damp from the snow, but still legible. It was a map, but not an ordinary map. It contained coordinates, times, unit names, and arrows indicating future movement. It was practically the complete roadmap for the enemy attack over the next 2 days. It was something no American should have access to. It was something that changed everything. "My God," Henry murmured, reading some passages. This is a tactical plan. And a detailed one. They were going to move 3 entire platoons here, and this," he pointed to a note in the corner, "indicates the exact time of the attack." "What time is it?" Martinez asked. "How much time do we have?" Henry took a deep breath. 15 minutes. The reaction was instantaneous. The commander closed the map, put the envelope in his inside coat pocket, and shouted, "Everyone in position now!" The soldiers ran behind the wreckage, reorganized their weapons, pulled up ammunition boxes, dragged the wounded to more protected locations, and made makeshift barriers using what remained of the terrain. The movement was quick, almost automatic, purely the result of training and terror. Meanwhile, Lewis continued holding Bruce, pressing the cloth against the wound on his side. "Hey, champ, hang in there. You made it back. We're almost there." Bruce was breathing weakly, but steadily. He seemed to sense that the soldier's commotion was related to what he had brought. He seemed to understand that it all depended on the warning he had given. The commander approached the 2 of them, kneeling beside them. "He didn't just pick up the radio," Fraser said. "He knew this was inside him." Lewis shook his head. "That doesn't make sense, Commander. He's a dog. Dog or not, he found out, and he brought it to us." Fraser stared at Bruce. "That animal saved an entire battalion without even knowing what it was carrying." But deep down, Fraser knew there was more to it. Military dogs aren't ordinary dogs. They sniff out explosives, mines, wounded people. But paper, information hidden inside metal. How did he find it? How did he know? How did he open the lid with his paws? Fraser had no time for philosophies. He needed to act. He stood up and ordered, "Henry, stay with me. We'll use the radio to monitor their progress." They positioned themselves behind a makeshift wall of destroyed wood and stones. The radio was turned on again, and the voices continued to be rapid, indicating movement. "They're coming," Henry said. "Exactly. And now we know where from," Fraser added. On the other side of the field, one of the soldiers pointed towards the woods. "Movement!" And it wasn't small. There were many, silhouettes emerging from the smoke, feet crushing snow in measured rhythm, the enemy troops advancing in line, fully confident in the information that the American platoon was vulnerable. They had no idea that that advantage had ended seconds ago. The commander raised his arm. "We hope." Everyone's heart seemed to beat in rhythm with the falling snow. The Germans advanced confidently, expecting to find Americans weak, disorganized, and freezing to death. But what they found was different. Soldiers positioned, prepared, and with prior knowledge of every step of the attack. And all this thanks to an envelope hidden inside a radio that a dog found all by itself. Bruce, though weak, raised his head when he heard the first enemy footsteps approaching. His gaze wasn't one of fear. It was one of mission accomplished. He knew he had brought something important. Perhaps he didn't know what, but he knew he had done the right thing. And at that moment, as the enemy approached, the commander looked at the dog and said, "You turned the tables, kid." But they didn't yet know that that map wasn't the only surprise hidden in that story, and what would happen in the next few minutes would be decisive and completely unbelievable. The enemy advanced confidently, treading firmly on the snow, certain they would find a weak, broken and disorganized American platoon. They had the plan in hand. They knew the time, they knew the angle, they even knew where the Americans would be hiding. They just didn't know that their plan had changed hands. The map, which was supposed to guarantee German victory, was now under Commander Fraser's coat, thanks to a wounded dog that could barely stand. The Americans were silent, their fingers on the trigger, breathing slowly. The snow seemed heavier, as if time itself had begun to move at a slower pace. The enemy approached with strategic calm, without rushing, without hesitation. It was the kind of step only those who believe they have won would take. The commander observed everything with a coldness that impressed even his men. He knew that if he shot too early, he would be massacred. If he waited too long, he would be surrounded. It was a game of millimeter precision. Next to him, Henry was listening to the radio. "Commander, they're splitting the troops. One part is going to the right to attack us from behind." "I already figured as much," Fraser replied. "That's exactly why we're going to surprise them first." Tension rose even further when a gust of wind carried the smell of gunpowder, revealing that the Germans were close enough to begin firing. But they still had no visual contact with the Americans, and that was exactly what Fraser wanted. "Wait," the commander repeated. Martinez swallowed hard. Lewis gripped the rifle so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Even Bruce, on the ground, breathing with difficulty, raised his head for a moment, as if waiting for a command. It was then that the first German soldier broke through the smokescreen and appeared completely exposed. Then came 3 more, then 10, then 20. They advanced in a block, in a march that only those who believe they are attacking weak prey would undertake. Fraser slowly raised his arm, and when he lowered it, it was as if the world exploded. Now! The American barrage was precise, organized, and devastating. The Germans, expecting chaos, found gunfire coming from the opposite direction. The psychological impact was immediate. Screams, confusion, soldiers throwing themselves into the snow. "What is this?" shouted one of the enemies in German, completely bewildered. The Americans had an absolute information advantage. They knew the troops' route, they knew the position of the flankers, and they knew exactly where each enemy unit would appear. Thanks to the map, thanks to the radio, thanks to the dog, Fraser shouted out new coordinates. "Stay low on the front line. Martinez, pull the wounded players. Henry, pass me the second position on the right flank." Henry adjusted the radio and translated what he heard. "They're ordering us to retreat. They're trying to reorganize." "We won't let that happen," Fraser said. The Americans opened fire toward enemy rear positions, precisely where, according to the map, the Germans would attempt to regroup. A single well-aimed shot there was enough to dismantle the entire enemy platoon's strategy. The German advance turned into widespread panic, and the panic turned into chaos. But the battle was far from over. Suddenly Henry paled. "Commander, the radio, they're calling for reinforcements, lots of them." Fraser clenched his fist. "They're going to try to turn it around again. It's a whole troop coming through the western woods." "I know." Lewis, on the other end, shouted, "Commander, if they arrive, we're dead." "That's precisely why." Fraser took a deep breath. "We're going to use what they let slip." He pulled the map from his pocket, opened it hurriedly, and pointed to a nearly faded marking. This here, this note. Henry approached. Is it their ammunition depot? Exactly. And it's close. Very close. Fraser nodded slowly. If they're bringing in reinforcements that way, they're passing right by their own weak point. The soldiers exchanged glances. It was madness, it was dangerous, but it was the only chance. If they managed to hit the German ammunition depot at the right moment, the reinforcements would be completely destabilized, perhaps even incapacitated. "Lewis," called the commander, "I need you to stay with Bruce." Lewis nodded. "It can leave." Bruce, even though weak, raised his head when he heard his name. "Relax, kid. You've already done more than anyone else here," Lewis whispered. The commander divided the troops. One part would hold their position and continue holding off the main attack. The other would advance along the route indicated on the map to try to reach the depot. "If this works," Henry murmured. "It'll work," Fraser replied. "This map is theirs. They don't expect it to be used against them." The advance team moved quickly, using logs, craters, and deep snow as cover. From afar, they could already hear the growing noise of enemy reinforcements. The number of footsteps gave it away. There were many, far more than the American platoon could withstand in a second wave. When they arrived at the indicated spot, they saw the storage facility, half buried in the snow, protected by logs and covered by camouflage tarpaulin. It was real, it was there, and that could turn the whole battle around. The commander gave the signal. "Get the grenades ready!" But before anyone could pull the pin, a familiar sound echoed in the distance. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't an explosion. It was a bark. Lewis listened first and looked back. Bruce had managed to get up. How? Nobody knew. He was weak, bleeding, but standing, and staring intently in the direction from which enemy reinforcements were coming, as if he were warning us about something, as if he had noticed something before everyone else. Lewis turned white. "Commander." "Bruce." Fraser turned and saw the dog staring into the woods, and at that moment he realized the attack they were about to carry out, that was not what they thought. There was more to come. There was another group hiding. There was an ambush behind the ambush, and the only one who felt it was the dog. The commander didn't hesitate. "No one shoots. Retreat now." The soldiers froze, but his voice came out firm. "Retreat now." And seconds later, the reason became clear. A much larger, silent, and camouflaged enemy group emerged from the flank, exactly where the Americans would have been if they had advanced 2 more steps. The German trap would have wiped out half the troops, and it only didn't happen because Bruce, even on the verge of exhaustion, warned them. Lewis fell to his knees beside the dog. "You saved us again." But the question that no one could answer was, as did he know? And what would come next? It would show that this was not the last surprise of the night. When the commander gave the order to retreat, the soldiers moved as if someone had pulled each of them by the shoulders. They didn't argue. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask for an explanation. They simply obeyed, because at that moment it was impossible to ignore the dog's gaze. Bruce was on the verge of collapse, almost collapsing in pain, but even so, he managed to stand up just to warn that something was wrong on that flank, and seconds later, the entire flank revealed itself to be a trap. If they had taken 2 more steps, half the group would have been dead. This kind of thing in a war is no coincidence. It's pure instinct, pure animal instinct, something that no human there would be able to perceive so quickly. When the platoon retreated and reorganized, enemy reinforcements emerged from the flank like a silent, coordinated black wave. It was an entire camouflaged force, coming to crush any American counterattack attempt. They advanced with the coldness of those who have done this many times before, and this proved that the map Bruce brought didn't show everything. There were more units involved. There were hidden movements. The Germans were better prepared than they seemed, but now the Americans had a trump card. They knew of the existence of this hidden troop before falling into it, and that was already half the victory. Commander Fraser positioned himself behind a burnt tree and shouted, "Everyone in line now!" The soldiers lined up quickly, raising their weapons, adjusting their sights, and preparing to face what was coming. It was a tough fight, and worse, they were tired, wounded, and with limited ammunition. They only had intelligence and timing on their side. The commander glanced at the German radio, still functioning, picking up desperate voices, hurried orders, and soldiers trying to reorganize their units. "They've lost the advantage," Fraser said, almost to himself. "Now we're going to use that." And then began an exchange of gunfire so intense that the snow on the ground seemed to leap with each impact. The Germans, realizing they had been detected too early, advanced more, aggressively. They didn't want to miss the window of opportunity. They had twice as many men, 3 times as much ammunition, and they believed they could push the American line back. But the Americans did not back down. They were fighting angrily, scared, with blood pulsing. They were certain they were alive because of an animal that couldn't even stand on its own. Lewis crouched down beside Bruce, trying to shield him with his own body. "Stay with me, partner. Stay with me." Bruce was trembling. His body was cold. His breathing was shallow. The snow beneath him was already stained red. Even so, he kept his eyes fixed on the woods, as if every sound was important, as if he were participating in the fight, even without moving. The commander realized this. He realized that somehow the dog was still sensing the enemy's movements, and when he turned his head to the left, Fraser understood the message. "The left flank," he shouted. "They're going to turn us around." The flanking soldiers reacted quickly, repositioning themselves seconds before a new enemy wave surged from the side. It was nearly impossible for a human to foresee this without advanced vision, but Bruce predicted it. That's how it was throughout the entire exchange of fire. Every time Bruce moved his head, wrinkled his nose, or perked up an ear, someone noticed that the enemy was attempting a new maneuver. Even wounded, even nearly unconscious, he was still useful. He was still fighting. Martinez shouted, sweating and nervous. "Commander, this dog is better than a radio, better than a guard, better than anything," Fraser replied without taking his eyes off the woods. "He is the reason we are alive. Don't forget that." The fighting intensified. The Germans brought in more men every minute. It was clear they were trying to crush the American platoon all at once. The noise was deafening. Gunfire, explosions, screams, breaking branches, snow being torn apart. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Soldiers slipped on the ice, fell, got up, shouted for ammunition, and in the midst of all this, Bruce began to crawl, slowly, as if he wanted to get closer to the line of fire. Lewis almost panicked. "No, no, you've done enough, stay here." But the dog didn't want to stand still. It was as if he knew this was the decisive moment, as if he sensed that without him once again, something would go unnoticed. The commander ran to Lewis. "Get him out of there." Lewis hesitated. "He wants to go." "I'm not going to." "Lose this animal now," Fraser said firmly. But before anyone could restrain Bruce, he froze. He stopped in the middle of the snow, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance. He growled, low, deep. It was a sound he only made when something very serious was happening. Fraser froze. "What is it now?" Henry pointed out. "On the radio. They're shouting something about a final position." "What does that mean?" Henry swallowed hard. "It means that they're going to throw everything away. Everything. They're going to attempt total destruction." "And where?" Henry pointed to the same spot where Bruce was looking. Silence, cold, fear, all at the same time. And then came the noise, a deep sound, long. It wasn't a gunshot. It wasn't a step. It was an engine. Lewis's eyes widened. "This isn't infantry," Fraser finished, his voice tense. "It's armored." The Germans were bringing a light vehicle, fast, sturdy, to crush the American position. It was the kind of reinforcement that none of the men they could face head-on, and Bruce knew this before anyone else. Lewis gripped the dog by the collar, desperate. "What do we do now?" Fraser looked at the map. His hands trembled. "They're coming this way," he pointed, "but they'll have to go through this narrow spot between the trees." Martinez understood immediately. "It's a funnel." "Exactly," said the commander. "If we stop the armored vehicle there, they'll lose their strength. But how are we going to stop this?" Fraser took a deep breath. He looked at Bruce, and he made the riskiest decision of the entire battle. A decision that would only make sense minutes later. The decision that Bruce, in some ways, already seemed to be expecting. Because what was to come next would be the part of the story that no one would believe if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes. The engine roar grew louder with each passing second, an inevitable warning that the worst part of the battle was approaching. The soldiers exchanged silent glances, the kind that needs no words. Everyone knew what an armored vehicle could do to a tired, wounded troop with limited ammunition. crush everything. There was no wall, tree trunk, or improvised position that could hold back such a machine. Commander Fraser knew this, and that's why he stared at the German map with a concentration bordering on despair. "They'll pass through here," Fraser repeated, pointing to the map. "This corridor is narrow." Martinez frowned. "Yes, but what do we do with this information? Throw snow in the engine?" "No," Fraser replied. "They can't go around it. This corridor forces the armored vehicle to pass between two enormous tree trunks." Henry added, "It's the only point where he's vulnerable." Fraser nodded. "Exactly. And that's where we're going to stop him." The soldiers exchanged glances. Stop an armored vehicle? With what? With ammunition almost depleted? With insufficient grenades? On frozen ground? It was madness. But war, sometimes, is made only of madness. Lewis was still standing apart beside Bruce. The dog was breathing with great difficulty, but his eyes remained fixed on the sound of the engine, more attentive than the radio, more attentive than any human lookout. He knew that this was the real danger. Lewis stroked her head. "You don't need to do anything else. You've already done the impossible." But Bruce didn't seem to accept that. Whenever the engine revved up, he tried to straighten his body. It was as if he needed to be standing, as if his mission wasn't over yet. The armored vehicle appeared minutes later. It was smaller than a heavy tank, but much faster. The kind of vehicle that can cut through snow, knock down barricades, and break through enemy lines with ease. It emerged from the woods like a predator, its front covered in dirt, ice, and smoke. The German soldiers advanced behind it, confident, certain that nothing could stop that machine. "Positions!" Fraser shouted. The platoon scattered, some hiding behind tree trunks, others lying in the snow, others preparing grenades with trembling hands. "Wait for the signal," the commander repeated. The armored vehicle surged forward, breaking branches, crushing the terrain, kicking up snow and mud. It approached the narrow corridor, the only spot where it could be caught. But there was a problem, a huge problem. The Germans knew the terrain. They knew that funnel existed, and they used that particular corridor precisely because they trusted that no one would be foolish enough to try and confront them there. They were speeding up, without hesitation, without fear. The snow was trembling, or it just vibrated, and the American platoon seemed to shrink in the face of the threat. It was at that moment that Bruce, lying in the snow, rose up in a way that no one expected. Slowly, in pain, with difficulty, but he rose up. Lewis was in shock. "No, Bruce. No. Stop, kid." But the dog took short, trembling, dragging steps, heading straight towards the hallway. Fraser saw that and ran towards him. "Lewis, hold that animal." Lewis tried, but Bruce escaped, again. Even wounded, even staggering, he threw himself to the only place where no one could be, the center of the corridor, right in front of the armored vehicle. "Bruce!" shouted several soldiers at the same time. The armored vehicle continued advancing, unaware of the something ahead. And then, in a final effort, Bruce did exactly what no one imagined, the last one. It wasn't a normal bark. It was a unique bark, short, direct, sharp. Those that only trained military dogs use to signal extreme danger. The commander froze. He recognized that bark. It was a warning, a code, a command that only appeared in advanced training exercises when a deadly threat was just a few meters away. It was in that second that Fraser made the decision that changed everything. Shoot the trees, now, not in the armored vehicle, in the trees. The soldiers did not question it. The bullets sliced through the air and struck the long frozen tree trunks that formed the funnel. The rumble echoed through the forest. The logs, already somewhat loose from accumulated snow and old explosions, began to crack. The armored vehicle, advancing rapidly, entered the corridor at the same instant that the left-hand tree trunk gave way, and then came the collapse. Two giant tree trunks collapsed onto the armored vehicle, crushing the upper part, bending the gun turret, and trapping the machine in its tracks. It didn't explode. It didn't work. But it remained immobilized, and that was all the Americans needed. The enemy soldiers behind the armored vehicle froze. They lost their protection. They lost their shield. And before they could react, Fraser shouted, "Now it's our turn!" The platoon opened fire with everything they had. The Germans retreated in despair, losing all organization, all confidence, all strategy. The noise lasted for minutes, chaos, seconds, and then silence. The kind of silence that only appears when the battle is over. Lewis ran over to Bruce and picked him up in his arms. "You did it! You did it!" The dog was too weak to respond, but his eyes remained open, staring at the armored vehicle trapped between the tree trunks, as if he understood that this had decided everything. Fraser approached, took off his helmet, and placed his hand on the dog's head. "You changed the course of this battle, kid. You saved everyone here, and everyone knew that this was no exaggeration. If Bruce hadn't barked, if Bruce hadn't warned them, if Bruce hadn't come back with the radio, none of that would have happened. The entire platoon survived because a military dog did what no human being had the courage, strength, or instinct to do. But the war was not over yet. And what would happen after that day would mark that platoon forever. What would you have done in the place of that platoon, seeing the dog risking its own life for everyone? This story shows that sometimes help comes from where you least expect it, and that courage doesn't depend on size, uniform, or rank. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. What city are you watching from? I want to know how far this story has gone.